Woo! X-Men Part 2! Now this is the one I'm supposed to like, right? Because it's good. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. I guess you could say that I'm not angry about this movie, I'm just a little bit disappointed. No. Yes. X-Men 2 is, in almost every conceivable possible way, better than its predecessor. But that doesn't automatically make it good. There's still this stink of the 2000s about it that won't quite wash off. So by today's standards, it's a little bit dated. Now, despite all of that, I do have to admit that there are many more good moments than there are bad moments. So, by that determination, I would say that it ultimately was very successful. Good movie. If you will remember, the thing that I complained the most about in X-Men 1 was the story, because it's awful, it's terrible, it's cheap, it's trite. All X-Men 1 screenwriters bothered to do was fill in the name and location placeholders in the Write Your Own Screenplay quiz they got from the magazine at the bathroom of the local Larbies. If I, indulge my fantasy here, had been hired to make the sequel to X-Men 1, the first thing that I would have done is fire the screenwriter. They didn't do that, but they did do the next best thing by completely rewriting his script. And it shows. The plot is better too, with higher stakes and less cliches. The plot of X-Men 1, to me, felt like it was written on a bet to see if they could make the most cliché comic book movie of all time. Now, obviously, if you've seen it, you know they've lost to Doctor Strange, but hey, coming in second place isn't bad, right? Now, we start off with Nightcrawler, played by Alan Cumming. You know, I love that whenever I tell him that Alan Cumming is in a movie, he automatically does that. It's so fun to mess with him that way. I might be a terrible friend. I don't care. Anyway, Kirk Cummings here tries to kill the president in an opening action scene that is really well done. It's amazing. It's awesome. It's one of the best of the decade. This attack not only grabs the attention of the moviegoers, but also that of the mutants and humans in the story, ratcheting up tensions between them dramatically. But Nightcrawler in his attack was only the puppet of an evil government official called William Stryker, who has sinister plans for Professor X and his mutants. Well, mostly for Professor X, but whatever. This is the movie where everything happens. The mansion is invaded. Xavier is kidnapped. No, the other one. Magneto escapes from prison, and this lady cracks her knuckles theatrically. The plot is tight, and it makes the 2-hour runtime just fly by. We move constantly from location to location, introducing new characters and building old ones. This pace is exciting and engaging, and it makes you gloss over some of the flaws that are present in the story. You know, like apparently how Professor X is capable of genocide if he thinks too hard. Wait, what? There are positives and negatives to this style of story, and if I didn't mention both of them, I'd be biased. The excitement and fast pace keep the audience engaged and excited, as I said already. But on the negative side, it shoves a lot of characters to the background and gives them a whole lot of nothing to do. Here are the examples of that, because I want to talk about them. Now, the biggest example of this is Brian Cox. He turns in a great performance as William Stryker, but he's just written a one-note villain role. Now, I do prefer him to the new Stryker and the Stryker that was in that one Wolverine movie that we don't mention. He's a cliché evil government official who they happen to get a really engaging actor to portray. The new Stryker, who is a secondary antagonist in the new series of X-Men films, is just so forgettable. Who cares about him? Even when he is relevant to the plot. So, wait, let me get this straight. So, if Stryker looks like this guy in the 1980s, in 20 years, he's gonna look like this guy? Cocaine's a hell of a drug, kids. Brought to you by the Council Against Cocaine. That doesn't exist. Funded by me. On the opposite end, Alan Cumming. It's just so boring as Nightcrawler. Now, at least it isn't as bad as it was in Son of the Mask, where he's sexually assaulting your eyeballs, but that doesn't automatically make it good. He has some interesting scenes with Storm, and they do at least stay faithful to the Catholic origin of the character. But nothing else, by the way. It doesn't matter because he's boring. And this is because they changed his origin for no good reason. Now, look. The X-Men movies make a ton of changes from the source material, and that's part of the process. Comic books are not films. You have to change things. You have to truncate characters. You have to add extra elements, sound design, all this stuff. But the choices you make have to be intentional. Like the tattoos. What does that add to the story? He's already a Catholic in the comics. That doesn't inform the characters or move the story forward. Or the fact that he was performing in a circus for years. That doesn't add anything to the story. If anything, it makes him more comfortable with who he is. Because he's used to being put on display. He's used to that. And he's accepted that, so he's more comfortable with who he is. For contrast, take a look at X-Men Evolution, where he's a lot more self-conscious. That's a lot more engaging. It's an obstacle in the character's success, and that's what makes us involved in characters. Now, on the other hand, I do have to mention Mystique, who is still awesome in these movies, and she's given even more screen time to be awesome in. She has some really engaging character moments with Magneto. And they made changes, but these are intentional changes to create something new, and that's why I'm okay with them. It's why I'm not okay with the changes they made to Rogue and changes they made to Nightcrawler, because they do not create something new and innovative. I still have to compliment Rebecca Romijn's performance as a character, because her mute, stoic silence lends a veneer of excitement and ambiguity to her character. You have to wonder where she came from and how she became who she is today, because we are never told. That mystery is really engaging. Now, Jennifer Lawrence as Mystique is lame and boring, not only because Jennifer Lawrence refuses to don the bloobs and doesn't have the physicality, but also because they give her too much backstory. It's like Darth Vader. He's a lot more interesting when you don't know where he came from. But when you do, he's just like, oh, she's just a kid who's acting out against her brother, father, whatever figure. Who cares? It's boring. You can either go to the comics version, who wears clothes and isn't a soap opera character, or you can go with the Naked Blue Lizard. There's no in between. You can't marry those two versions of the character. And that's what they try to do with the new films, and it fails. Rogue and Iceman, even more sadly, have nothing to do in this movie. It makes me so mad that they're even included in this story. Hey, Iceman. Listen, I gotta ask you some questions, buddy. Why do you even care if you can't have sex with Rogue? Like, why? Hey, you're gay, remember? Brian Michael Bendis made this very clear. You're gay, okay? You are gay now. Your attraction to this character, Anna Paquin, you're not attracted to her anymore. You're gay now, okay? You are gay. So why do you care if you can't have whatever with her? She's the perfect beard. So what's your problem? The most annoying thing is that not only do they never participate in the action scenes, making them never relevant to the story whatsoever, but they're constantly a burden on the other characters like Wolverine, and they have no chemistry together. Shawn Ashmore and Anna Paquin are fine actors. They're very good, but they never mesh together as a couple. I don't care about their romance as a subplot because they never convince me that they are in love. So it's just wasted screen time. Hey, remember when X-Men used to be about Sentinels and adamantium instead of high school rom-com crap? Thank you, Wolverine. Thank you. Oh, and did I mention that Lady Deathstrike is in this movie? Because she is, for 5 minutes, and then she's killed off. Woo! Well, sorry, Lady Deathstrike fans. Better luck next time. You know, this movie made me feel something that I never expected it to make me feel. It made me sad for Cyclops. That's not because he's an interesting character that I would ever sympathize with, but it's simply because they gave him so little to do that it's painful. The sad thing about Cyclops in these movies is that they took a boring character from the comics and they made him even more boring. Because they have to give all of his screen time to Wolverine because they're fighting for the same leading man role. And of course, since Wolverine is a lot more popular, he won that battle. They only define him as Jean Grey's much less interesting boyfriend. That relationship is the only thing that defines him as a character. And that's why their romance doesn't work. Because they're supposed to be in love, but they never explain why. What do these characters have in common? Let's just have them sit down and talk about their relationship. Now, except for something in the first 5 minutes, they never do that. So we never get invested in their romance. Even the tepid romance between Iceman and Rogue had conversation. They talked to each other. They had dialogue. They interacted. But they don't. It's just Cyclops is Jean Grey's boyfriend, and that's it. And that makes me angry. I never knew that I could feel for Cyclops. This is a recurring problem with Bryan Singer's X-Men films. You see, the producers, him, Lauren Schuler Donner, all them, they have such a large arsenal of characters to draw upon that they end up bringing way too many of them to the silver screen in one-note bit parts. They end up defining characters entirely through gimmicks, soulless romances, or just nothing at all. Hey, remember when this guy played Trask, or when that guy played Colossus, or when this person played Beast? I didn't until I rewatched these films. Now, I do have to admit that the new X-Men films do this same problem, but to a lesser extent. Until X-Men Apocalypse, which I'll talk about later, it was pretty clear who the main characters were and who the main characters weren't. They kept focus. This movie doesn't even bother trying. It tries to give a plot to everyone. To Rogue, and to Iceman, and to Nightcrawler, and to Professor X, and to Pyro, and to Jean Grey, and to Cyclops, and to Wolverine, and to Lady Deathstrike, and to Stryker, and I can't keep talking, I need to breathe. In trying to give something to every single one of these characters, it ends up giving nothing to any of them. Wolverine, Mystique, and Jean Grey are the exceptions, but this is only because I believe their plots worked best, with less attention drawn to them, with the exception of Wolverine, who got too much. You know, I'd better come back around to talking about things that I like about this movie before you get the impression that I don't. Never mind, the ship has sailed on that. Right, the action! This is really good action, and it's an all-around improvement from the previous film. Some highlights include the opening action scene, the mansion invasion, and my personal favorite, Magneto's escape from prison. All of these scenes are really solid action, including the climax with fun powers and legitimate stakes. The powers are still a render or two away from being done, but it's past the point where it's annoying, and it's at the point where it's just kind of accepted as part of the style. Now, what I don't like about the action scenes is that all the X-Men, to me at least, still feel like they're holding back. While I do love what they're doing with Jean Grey and the development of her powers, you know, starting out in the first film where she can barely do anything, then she moves into the second film where she's pushing herself more and more and becoming more powerful, accessing that Phoenix potential. Compared to the cartoons, and especially the new movies, the action in these films, except for occasional moments, seems stilted, lifeless, and amateur by comparison. Now, on its own, it's still pretty good. You can watch this film and never have a single complaint about the action. But watching this, and then going to X-Men Days of Future Past, which is the best-looking X-Men film ever made, it's just so sad by comparison. You know, this is a relatively well-liked film, but I think the one thing that people don't appreciate this movie for is its faithfulness to the comic books. Now, sure, it's no Deadpool, but Deadpool didn't come out 15 years ago. You have to consider the era in which this came out. Now, yes, this movie is embarrassed to be a comic book movie, no denying it, but only in terms of aesthetic and certain characters. Sure, the costumes aren't the comic book costumes, but look at the rest of the movie. Except for what I already talked about, all of the X-Men are here, and this movie gets a lot right in terms of adapting the X-Men to the silver screen. Cyclops is boring in the comics. He's boring in the movies. Professor X is boring in the comics. He's boring in the movies. Sorry, Patrick Stewart. You are amazing, but you have nothing to do in these movies. Their villains are represented on screen very effectively, especially Magneto. Magneto is one of the great villains of modern cinema. Sorry, Loki, but you will only ever be a discount Magneto. In an era where Batman spoke like he had bronchitis and the Hulk fought mutant dogs, the X-Men films were incredibly faithful to their source material. At least Professor X isn't portrayed by Tilda Swinton. X2 X-Men United is a mixed bag. Unlike its predecessor, X2 has more good things than bad. It's a good movie. For every Rogue and Mystique, there is a Magneto, and for every Alan Cumming...
Oh.
That joke's getting old, I need to stop it. As Nightcrawler, there's Brian Cox as Stryker and Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. You have to view every film in context. For example, by today's standards, Star Wars, the original one, is a cliche movie that's boring, mediocre, with bad acting and shaky effects. But by the 70s, it's a revolutionary film that changed modern cinema. By the same token, X-Men 2 is a little bit dated. It's a solid comic book movie, but nothing special. There's still that early 2000s style, this kind of there's still that early 2000s style over substance mentality and the shaky writing. For the early 2000s, X-Men 2 is a great comic book film that blazed the trail for more authenticity to the comic books and more mature storytelling. It may not be perfect, but it's much better than its peers. Look at it as a step on the stairway to where we are today. With all my thoughts on X-Men 2 wrapped up, I'm just going to end this review a little bit differently than the last one. I'm going to give it a ranking. Now, hear me out. I decided to do this ranking system because I feel like it would help me organize my thoughts regarding these films because they're complicated and there are 9 X-Men movies, so I need something to help me out a little bit. Now, if you disagree with me, that's perfectly fine, but this is my list of movies that I like better than other movies. So, it's just going to go from 1 to 9, with 1 being the best and 9 being the worst based upon how much I like or dislike a particular film, and then that's it. As for the 2 X-Men films that I've already reviewed, X-Men 1 and Deadpool, I'm just going to give them a ranking now, because I'm too lazy to go back and add this to the end of those reviews. So, without further ado, here we go. Deadpool, number 6. X-Men 1 gets a 5. X-Men 2 earns 3rd place. See you next time. Bye.